Greetings and welcome to Aspects of Aliyah. We're living in a time that I personally thought I wouldn't see in my own lifetime, where anti-Semitism has risen to an unprecedented level in the post-war period. We've witnessed these dreadful outbursts of anti-Semitism, not only at street level, but also in academic circles, with pro-Palestinian or so-called pro-Palestinian encampments at major universities, both in the United States and in the United Kingdom and across Europe. Strangely, when participants asked by GB News, for instance, and other television channels why they're there, many of them don't really seem to know what the cause of the protest is for, and many are simply virtue signalers or seeking some kind of assumed moral high ground. However, the question of the legitimacy of Israel has never been far from the headlines since I was a young man, and even more so since 1967, when the Palestinian identity sort of surfaced. Rather interesting when we think about it. At the turn of the century, when there were aspirations for a homeland for Israel, at the meetings for Zionism, the Zionist Convention, over 2,000 people attended and 50,000 people supported by letter, etc. But a similar thing in 1913 for Arab nationalism only attracted 13 people. In one sense, that's a little by the by, but as time went by, I think we're familiar with the legitimacy legally of the Jewish people's claim to the land for Israel in the modern era. But I do think that after this broadcast, the next one may well be worth revisiting that. But tonight I'd like to look at the theological basis of Israel, which obviously concerns land and covenants, which is essential to the history of Israel. So the history of Israel roughly can be stated as having a very early narrative mystery in the beginning, which is what's known as the etiological history, which is the first 11 chapters of Genesis, which speaks about the creation and contains the Eden narrative, the story of Adam and Eve, the story of Cain and Abel, and goes on to speak about the deluge, and eventually arrives at the story of Avram in Mesopotamia, in Ur of the Chaldees, which is a region that used to worship the moon, but it speaks about how he's called out and then proceeds to go to a land that he knew not. However, the thing that is really the whole crux of the issue is the relationship between God, land, and people. So therefore, the primary question concerned the validity and the legitimacy of Israel as Jewish homeland can really be settled by an examination of the scriptures that deal with the covenantal aspects. However, before proceeding, it's useful to define the biblical term covenant, in Hebrew, bris, or bereshit. Both words have got a similarity, whereas bereshit means beginning, beres literally means to cut a covenant. So we find beris in bereshit. So the Hebrew term berit, covenant, occurs 286 times in the Masoretic text of the Old Testament. The Masoretic text is the one that you'll be familiar with. It's the one that you see that's got little dots and like little T underneath some letters to provide vowels, because previous to the Masoretic text, the text contained no vowels, only consonants, which of course made life quite difficult, because putting differential consonants can actually mean the different interpretation of a word. So what does rid actually mean? Well, I suppose in English we could use expressions such as treaty, pact, agreement, a solemn promise, an obligation. But covenant really has got a forensic connotation with it that is largely absent from most of such interpretations. Now, the Greek term diatheke, covenant, or the translation of berit in Hebrew, appears in the Septuagint, or the Greek version of the Old Testament, 270 times. In the New Testament, diatheke occurs 33 times on 7 occasions, citing the Old Testament. There is, however, and this is interesting, an additional meaning employed in the Greek, which refers to a legislative process where this term is used, namely testament or will. So in the New Testament, the concept of covenant, drawing from the Septuagint, can be noted both in Paul and the writer of Hebrews, meaning that it is a legal will or testament. So therefore, that covenant in the Greek language contains the idea that it's passed on and on and on through generations. So covenants dating from around 750 BCE have been discovered in the ancient Near East, and the practice probably goes back to the 3rd millennium. However, covenant in the Hebraic sense is something a little bit more. So we know the land of Israel became re-established as the national homeland of the Jewish people at 4:30 p.m. on the 5th day of Aliyah, 5708, on the Jewish calendar, on the 14th of May in 1948. This, of course, was some 1800 years after the Jewish people had been dispossessed from the land by the Romans in the 1st and 2nd century. Firstly, the destruction of the Jerusalem temple in 70 and the failure of the Bar Kokhba revolt in the early part of the 2nd century of the Common Era. But before we actually visit the scriptures, it's probably expanding the idea is what is a nation and what is a covenant. So a nation is a national homeland, but a covenant, as explained above, is a biblical term which literally means to cut a covenant. Can have slightly different meanings, but to cut the covenant basically means it's something that's been sealed in blood. As we know, the scriptures have much to say about the land of Israel and the place of the Jewish people in relationship to the land. Psalm 105, verses 6 through 9, expresses the understanding of the covenant as made with what we'll call the house of Israel. O seed of Abraham, his servant, you, children of Jacob, his chosen ones. He is the Lord, our God. His judgments are throughout all of the earth. He remembers his covenant forever, the words which he commanded for 1,000 generations, the covenant which he made with Abraham and swore as an oath to Isaac, and he confirmed it to Jacob for a statute, to Israel as an everlasting covenant, saying to you, I will give this land as the allotment of your inheritance. These verses refer to 3 passages in the book of Genesis. Firstly, verse 9 refers to covenant with Abraham. In verses 3 through 7, we're told that Avram, as he was then, was at Shechem in Canaan, when the Lord appeared to him and said, "To you and your offspring I will give this land." In Genesis 15, God actually makes his covenant with Avram. Verses 5 to 11. Avram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. In other words, he became a Zaddik through this. He also said to him, "I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldees to give you this land and to take possession of it." But Avram said, "O sovereign Lord, how can I know that I shall gain possession of it?" So the Lord said to him, "Bring me a heifer, a goat and a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon." Avram brought all these to him. He cut them into two pieces and arranged them in halves, opposite of each other. However, he did not cut the birds in half. Now, this shows consistency with the instructions of bird sacrifices, because birds were not cut in half, they were torn asunder. The birds of prey came down upon the carcasses, but Avram drew them away. As the sun was setting, Avram fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful cloud of darkness came over him. Verse 17 forward. When the sun had set and darkness had fallen, a smoking fire pot with a blazing torch appeared and passed between the 2 pieces. On the same day, the Lord made a covenant with Avram, saying, "To you and your descendants I have given this land, from the river of Egypt, the Nile, to the great river, the river Euphrates, land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Yebushim." Examining this passage, there are several things that deserve attention. Most of all, we find Abraham preferring his sacrifice in the traditional manner, but to confirm a covenant, as sacrifices accompanying the ritual were burning, both parties would walk through the pieces to confirm the covenant, where they would make promises to each other. But note here that passing through the pieces is a one-sided affair. The Lord only appears in a fiery manifestation and passes through the pieces. Avram is not required to do the same. This is one of the biblical examples of the Lord appearing in a fiery manifestation, as in Exodus 3:2, the burning bush. 1 Kings 18:38, where the Lord consumes Eliyahu's sacrifice on Mount Carmel against the prophets of Baal. 1 Chronicles 21:26, where the sacrifice is the purchase of the threshing floor of Arunah, which become the temple, are consumed. 2 Chronicles 7:1, where fire consumes the sacrifice, the dedication of the temple, and one that's very familiar in Acts 2:3 on the day of Pentecost, where fiery tongues light on the heads of those assembled in the upper room as a sign of acceptance by the Lord. Avram is not required to do so, likewise, passing through the blaze purchase himself. So when the Lord made this covenant, it was sufficient that he himself walked through to confirm this covenant. Therefore, only he can break it. As we know, it's not written anywhere that he will, and he never has. So now over to Ezra, and then we'll return to look at the giving of the land in further biblical detail.
Ezra International is a Christian nonprofit organization that helps Jewish people immigrate to Israel, or as they say in Israel, make Aliyah. Through your generous support, we are able to help Jewish people make Aliyah by providing one-on-one support for Jewish people in their home countries, completing in-depth ancestry research, by procuring necessary immigration documents, and finally, financing the immigration journey. Since 1995, Ezra International supporters have helped tens of thousands of people from around the world, and thousands are still waiting to return to Israel. God said he would be known by both the Jewish people and the nations when He restores them to their land. Your financial gift helps make that happen. Give now and be part of this great prophetic restoration process. Go to ezrainternational.org and give your gift of hope today.
Welcome back. Genesis 17 strengthens the identity of the people with the land itself, along with the covenant of circumcision, which of course is a blood sealing, and also Avram's name change. But to keep it brief, we'll just look at these verses from verse 3. Then Avram fell on his face, and God spoke with him, saying, As for me, behold. Notice, use the word behold. It's a special word. Not look, behold. You look at those pictures on my wall, but you behold the sunset. There's a very emotive, special thing about something that you behold. My covenant is with you, and you shall be a father of many nations. No longer will your name be Abraham, but your name shall be called Abraham, for I have made you father of many nations, and I will make you exceedingly fruitful. And I will make nations of you, and kings shall come from you. And I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants after you in their, and the sense is all their, generations, for an everlasting covenant to be God to you and your descendants after you. Also I give to you and your descendants after you the land of Canaan as an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. Back at Psalm 105, verse 9. Swearing to Isaac, may God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you, that you may be an assembly of peoples, and give you the blessing of Abraham to you and to your descendants with you, that you may inherit the land in which you are a stranger, which God gave to Abraham. Verse 10. The covenant being confirmed to Jacob as a decree to Israel, as an everlasting covenant, once again, following line of descent, Genesis 48:3. And Yaakov said to Joseph, the Lord Almighty appeared to me at Luz, in the land of Canaan, and there he blessed me, and said to me, I am going to make you fruitful. I will increase your numbers. I will make you into a community of peoples, and I will give you this land as an everlasting possession to your descendants after you. The use of the word everlasting is of great importance. A dictionary definition of the word everlasting includes perpetual, unintermittent, interminable, continual, and forever. Something everlasting, when decreed by God, must contain all of these elements. Christians who feel that covenants made by the Lord with Israel can be broken should consider the following thought. If God can break his covenant with Israel, what future is there in his covenant with us? It's been suggested that the dispersion of the Jews showed this covenant was obsolete. This idea cannot be found to be stated in the scriptures anywhere. To show the error of this statement, you do not actually have to live in the house to own it. When the Jewish people were dispersed, it didn't break the covenant. It just simply meant that they were scattered for disobedience. It didn't say they couldn't come back. In one sense, even though the parable of the lost son in Matthew couldn't strictly be applied to this, there is a sense of it, where God is waiting for his people to come home and come back to him. And how's that going to happen? It's going to happen by divine fiat and the fulfillment of Isaiah 49:22, when the Gentiles help the Jewish people to come back. to their covenanted ancestral homeland. The thing that seems to be forgotten by people who despise Israel and the Jewish people and think the land doesn't belong to them, have actually missed a very important element of this God, land and people trichotomy. In Leviticus 25:32, it states quite plainly that God says the land must not be sold permanently, for the land is mine. The land belongs to him. The land is mine. For you are sojourners and temporary residents with me. In other words, you're living here under my fiat and my lordship. Following Paul Robert's exegesis of this passage, there's a suggestion that Israel doesn't actually own the land in the common understanding of the above passage. As we've seen, land is the special and eternal possession of God himself. Note, it's been suggested land is granted and not given to Israel as far more a type of perpetual lease and should not be understood as a gift. Therefore, ipso facto, the Israelites are forever tenants in the land and as such can be evicted with no opportunity to return as new or secondary tenants with an inalienable right, not on physical land, but all that's attendant concern them. Supersessionists wrongly sees this text, demanding that the theological implication of this text is the Israelites in the land are no different than anybody else who lives there. So, by this idea, an American Jewish person who goes to Israel goes an American and intrudes to a certain extent. Likewise, a French Jewish person remains a Frenchman as a squatter in the land, etc., etc. Supersessionists, or those that follow replacement theology, I think replacement theology is a misnomer because the Jewish people will never be replaced because the God's representatives, they're the people they made a covenant with. So firstly, they're not replaced, and a theology without Israel is not a theology. It's simply a vain imagination, in my own opinion, for whatever that is worth. The better term is actually displacement theology, where the church comes in and pushes Israel out of the way. In this sort of thinking, Israel is an irrelevancy. God finished with Israel. When the temple was destroyed in 70 CE, that was the end of it. No relationship. Israel, Jewish people, God, finished. The church is now the new Israel. And the Jewish people are an irrelevance, or even an irritation. And they've re-emerged as this monsterized entity that stole a land from a people it didn't belong to. However, that is another subject altogether. Firstly, God is the God of creation and Lord of all the earth. As God chose people for himself, he prepared a place for them. If God indeed is Lord of all the earth, and it's his possession, it's his choice, it's his election, it's his calling, and it's covenant that delineates, states, enacts the ownership of the right residency of the people and the land. God, people, land, a three-stranded cord that I believe and the Bible teaches cannot be broken. So why the Jewish people there? What's the importance of the Jewish people and the land? The call of the Jewish people was to be a light unto the world in Isaiah 49:6, and as such, they were placed in his land with a call and a purpose. Supersessionism and displacement theology doesn't allow for the Jewish people to have a hope and a future. Was it not Jeremiah said, "I have plans to prosper you and not for evil, to give you a hope and a future"? He wasn't speaking that to the church, was he? Because the church didn't exist in those days and wasn't even thought of. the Jewish people to be a light unto the world. As such, a place in his land. In simple terms, the Jewish people were called and appointed in what should be understood in the family property as owned by the father. As their relationship, if the relationships break down, they may be cast out of the family home, but it doesn't mean that they cannot come back again. These covenants that were made with God, with the Jewish people, are irrefragable. They can't be shattered, they can't be broken. And God is not a man that he should lie, or the Son of Man that he should change his mind. And interestingly enough, and it should be remembered, that even though the final dispersion of Jewish people took place under the revolution led by Simeon Bar Chokva, there was still a remnant of the Jewish people. There has always been a remnant of the Jewish people in the land, mostly in the north and mostly in places like Sfat in the north of Israel. But the understanding of the covenant between God, the Jewish people in the land, has never gone away. And that is why on Passover, Pesach, that's just recently gone, as the cup is lifted and the stories are told, Lashar Bana, Yerushalayim, or longer version, today we drink this cup in the exile, but next year in Jerusalem. It's been the hope of the Jewish people. The Zionist movement worked towards that end. You've listened to my teachings before, but just to remind you, there was never any illegal entry into Eretz Israel. It was a return, fulfilling prophecy. It was a return, bringing back the reality. It was a realization of the unfolding, or part of the unfolding, of the kingdom of God. God made an eternal covenant with his people, known by several names, Israelites, or more commonly today, the Jewish people. Let us labour while it is still day to help re-establish the Jewish people in their ancient, ancestral, but most important covenanted homeland. Quite frankly, I think we can say, without fear of contradiction, if we stand against the Jewish people, if we stand against God's eternal covenant, we are actually standing against him. Please, Lord, deliver us from pretentiousness and vain imaginations, and let us live our lives according to your eternal word concerning your eternal covenant. So, until the next time we meet in aspects of Aliyah, God be with you until we meet again.